This is the new OnePlus 7T that OnePlus sent over to me to test. So, as is the usual here on this channel, let's first get started with a complete walkthrough on it. Now, if you're not familiar, a complete walkthrough of this channel is where I try to go through every single feature I possibly can on a new device so that you guys are better prepared should you be in the market to actually go buy one. With that said, there is a lot to go through. So, let's get started with the hardware. The new OnePlus 7T has a matte frosted glass now on the back and comes in two colors, frosted silver and glacier blue. It is a 6.55-inch AMOLED display with a 90 Hz refresh rate for smooth scrolling and transitions, and something that we're kind of expecting from OnePlus at this point, HDR10+, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. OnePlus also claims that the screen can get up to 1,000 nits of brightness and blocks 40% of blue light to help with eye strain. At the top of that screen, we have a 16-megapixel f2.0 aperture with a fixed focus, electronic stabilization, and support for video at up to 30 frames a second at 1080p. That front-facing camera is also used for OnePlus's Face Unlock that is actually really snappy. Also, for security, we have an in-display fingerprint reader that is also pretty responsive. Moving around the device, we have our volume rocker on the left, nothing at the top, our power button on the right, along with our notification switch for three options: ring, vibrate, and silent. On the bottom, we have our speaker, our dual SIM card tray, and our USB-C port that is capable of using OnePlus's Warp Charge 30T, which is apparently 23% faster than their normal Warp Charge 30. And it'll get the 3700 milliamp battery in here from 0 to 70% in 30 minutes. Speaking of that speaker on the bottom, it combined with the one above the screen give the 7T dual stereo speakers that support Dolby Atmos and sound like this.
This trident resides the power of Atlantis.
Inside the device, we have a Qualcomm Snapdragon 855 Plus chipset with 8 gigs of LPDDR4X RAM and 128 gig UFS 3.0 2-lane storage, available in 256 gigs in select markets. Moving around the back, we have a 3-camera setup in a ring that reminds me of the new Vivo Nex 3 or the older Nokia Lumia devices even. We have a main camera using the Sony IMX586 48-megapixel sensor that has an f1.6 aperture, and it's the same sensor as the OnePlus 7 Pro, by the way, with EIS and OIS that OnePlus says they combine to get an even more stable video. Besides that, we have an ultra-wide-angle 16-megapixel 117-degree field of view f2.2 aperture camera that also seems to be the same as the 7 Pro. But we have a 2x telephoto here instead of a 3x, which is what I actually would have preferred to see. But it is a 12-megapixel f2.2 aperture one. Now, to keep the comparison going, the OnePlus 7 Pro telephoto is an 8-megapixel f2.4 camera. The phone can shoot up to 4K at 60 frames per second and slow-mo video in 1080p at up to 240 frames per second. And even a super slow-mo at 960 frames per second that apparently is coming in an update, but I didn't have on the device just now, so I couldn't test that. Now, diving into the camera modes really quickly, we have the following. Super Macro Mode, which is a camera mode that the 7 Pro doesn't actually have, and it allows the camera, and it works on all three by the way, to be able to focus on things that are between 2.5 and 8 centimeters away for some extreme close-ups. We have Portrait Mode that blurs the background of an image to mimic a shallower depth of field. A Night Mode that blends multiple images of various exposures to get a much brighter image at night. Pro Mode that lets you control things manually like aperture, ISO, etc. Time Lapse lets you take videos that will automatically be sped up when played back. Panorama Mode, which is a typical mode that we see that stitches multiple photos together to create a panoramic shot. And Slow Motion, like we mentioned before, that'll let you shoot up to 1080p at 240 frames per second. Now, for software, running Android 10 out of the box, which is a nice surprise, and OnePlus's own Oxygen OS 10 on top of it. Now, I'm sure a lot of us are familiar already with Android and Oxygen OS, so I won't dive into it here. Suffice it to say that it's a pretty minimalistic UI that is pretty close to stock Android, actually, but the biggest thing that we all notice about it is just how optimized it is. It's super responsive. And here are some popular benchmarks for anyone interested in those. Now, the OnePlus 7T will be available starting on October 18th for $599. Interestingly enough, that's $50 more than the 6T started at, but let's see if it's worth the extra $50 in the real-world test that I'll be doing shortly. Be sure to subscribe and ding the bell next to the word subscribe to be notified when that goes live with camera comparisons and a battery test, etc. Also, check out the link below to sign up for my email newsletter that goes out once a week. It has all the videos that I do here on YouTube, but also tips and tricks and news and other things that don't necessarily make it here to video. Appreciate it. As always, though, regardless, Thanks for watching.